Welcome to New York's #2 sports show. The New York Giants lose again on prime time. They lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers by a score of 26-18 in Pittsburgh. And the Steelers now have won 22 consecutive home games on Monday Night Football. The last time they actually lost was to the Giants in 1991. That's just a crazy, crazy streak for it to have lasted as long as it has. And it doesn't end in this one. So a pretty sloppy game played by the Giants, but one of which they were in. I mean, they were definitely in it till the end, but typically speaking, this Giant team doesn't really know how to win late, and that kind of happened again here. And it's interesting, as much as the Giants were in it the whole way, they never led the game. They tied the Steelers a good amount. The game was actually tied 9-9 going into the second half. But then things opened up on a Calvin Austin punt return touchdown. Now, it's controversial in the sense that they missed what would have been at least running into the kicker, at most roughing the kicker, the punter in this case. So what happened there was a penalty on the Giants, and then it would have offset, and then they would have re-kicked. But it doesn't go the Giants' way. The Giants do show some fight back, and as far as, they go down 2 touchdowns, they get a touchdown of their own, but then it's a 2-point conversion that just goes totally haywire. On just some, I don't know if you want to call it miscommunication, and I have no problem with them going for 2 in that situation. I really don't. But they go for sort of a crazy formation play where, pretty much most of the offense is on the left side of Daniel Jones. And I guess Singletary might have been talking to the ref, and they wanted to get the play off quickly, but they weren't. But they weren't ready, and so it just got snuffed out right away. Just a very ugly sort of circumstances, which led to Daniel Jones really being as furious as I've ever seen him. I don't mind that. I like him showing some fight and some fire, but that doesn't work out. And then what was a pretty clean game by both teams ends up not being by the end, where the Giants turn it over twice, Steelers turn over once late. So the Giant turnovers was a T.J. Watt sack fumble recovery against Jermaine Illuminor, and then at the end, a pretty bad interception by Daniel Jones. So kind of status quo in the sense that, look, Daniel Jones is going to be the starting quarterback next week. Is it going to last the season? If I had to guess, probably not, one way or another, whether it be, look, he is injury prone, that's always possible. But, with what the record is and with the injury implications contract-wise for Daniel Jones, I wouldn't expect it to be too much longer, but there's 2 more games until the bye. Home against the Commanders, and then they're playing the Carolina Panthers in Germany. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, the Giants dropped to 2-6. Like, the Giants' road efforts have been better than what we've seen at home, for what it's worth. So the Giants, they're 2-2 on the road, 0-4 at MetLife Stadium. And a big story out of this game, which was something I had discussed last episode, and that is Deonte Banks and his sort of lack of effort and lack of just attention to detail. And he ends up being benched in favor of Greg Stroman Jr., which is kind of, that's the crazy thing, is that the Giants had a lot of cornerback injuries. Cordell Flott out, Odori Jackson out, Trey Hawkins technically active, but was really only an emergency option. And I got to say, Greg Stroman Jr. actually didn't look that bad, but the point is, Tay Banks, in a situation where you really only had Nick McLeod and Drew Phillips as your normal cornerbacks, I think what happened was, and there was a couple of plays, but I think the one that upset the Giants the most was what could have been a George Pickens touchdown, ends up not being, because he didn't get his second foot in. They felt like, Banks could have done more. And I do kind of agree that something seemed off there. He didn't go for the ball. There could have been more of a fight and determination to get to where he needed to get to. Something is off with him. And look, this is not looking good. I mean, for Deonte Banks, this has been a step back in year 2. Not that he was amazing as a rookie, but he was pretty solid. And you felt as if this was something to work on. He has been really, really one of the disappointing parts of this team. And look, as much as and maybe it's easy to say this if health exists. I look at this past draft class, this literally the last one, the 2024 draft class. I think there's some promising things between Malik Neighbors, Tyler Nubin, Drew Phillips, Theo Johnson, and Tyrone Tracy Jr. I think collectively, not bad, honestly, but it's only year one. But man, Joe Shane's drafting 22 and 23. Boy, that is pretty rough and very hard to defend. But yeah, this was a game where the Giants take a lot of penalties. I think they took 11, so really sloppy. A lot of the chatter after the game, I think there is disappointment in that locker room as far as, again, there not being enough, I think, urgency and overall effort. And I don't know if that necessarily jumps out on the screen. Again, maybe it's the attention to detail. But, Dexter Lawrence, who's, really become one of the leaders on this team, he was upset. Brian Burns, I think Greg Van Roten actually as well might have had a pretty passionate sort of talk to the team after the game. But yeah, again, you can't have some of the stuff that's happening. And even though the Giants were in it against what is a pretty good Pittsburgh team, is 6-2 maybe a little misleading? Yeah. But what was the stat I said at the top? 22-game home win streak on Monday Night Football. That's not nothing. A lot of that's under Mike Tomlin. So, yeah, the Giants certainly were not embarrassed, but we're used to this at this point where typically they're not going to find the way to get the win on most occasions. That's kind of what happened here. And I can't really say that any one unit was good. Certainly special teams was shit. Even if you want to say that it shouldn't have been a punt return touchdown and it should have been a roughing the punter, sure. But at the same time, like special teams, it was not good. And while the defense, maybe the defense wasn't bad, but it really, it wasn't anything great. I mean, 426 total yards for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and pretty good balance as well. 167 rushing yards and 259 passing yards. But look, you honestly look at the stats, and they were pretty even. First downs, Steelers had 3 more first downs. Third down conversions were good for Pittsburgh, 6 for 13. Giants were 5 for 15, but Pittsburgh a lot. And I noticed this with the Giants defense, where they've been giving up these key third and long conversions. And that happened again here with the Steelers. Time of possession, very close to even. You get those late turnovers, but it was a pretty clean game. Again, really the big difference was that punt return touchdown by Calvin Austin. And Calvin Austin also had a touchdown on offense as well. So, this is Giant football, and they make enough mistakes where they'll typically find a way to lose. And that's what happened here. So Daniel Jones, 24 for 38, 264 yards, no touchdowns and 1 pick. That is now 8 straight primetime games with no passing touchdowns for Daniel Jones. And the funny thing about that is, Chris Manhertz had a receiving touchdown that was taken away due to an illegal shift, I think, that involved Malik Neighbors. And, you could question that call, but again, it's just crazy how, by luck, Jones, no passing touchdowns in 8 straight primetime games, and his record now sits at 1-15 in primetime games. So again, there's the primetime game conversation, but really it's more about just the team in general, more than anything, but that is just extreme and fucking crazy. Tyrone Tracy, unfortunately for him, he leaves the game late due to a likely concussion. He's in concussion protocol. And he had a really good game. I'm really impressed by Tyrone Tracy Jr. And look, this is his backfield. Make no mistake about it. Devin Singletary got very, very little run. This was Tyrone Tracy exclusively. But with this injury, on a short week, you can't feel great about his odds of shooting up versus the Commanders. So something to consider. But Tyrone Tracy Jr., excellent. Really, I think the future is really bright for him. Malik Neighbors, relatively quiet in this one. Came close to a touchdown at one point, but couldn't get the feed in. 7 catches, 71 yards, which look like that's a quality, sort of workman-like stat line, if you will, on 13 targets. But he also had a couple of key drops. One of them was specifically bad late. So a far from perfect game for Malik Neighbors. Darius Slayton, actually, he really was wide receiver too. And we've seen a lot of it be Wan'Dale Robinson, but Slayton, who has much more big play potential than Wan'Dale, but Slayton, he has become kind of more and more of a bigger part of the offense. What's interesting about him is with the trade deadline about a week away, could Darius Slayton have played his last game as a Giant, or could it be versus the Commanders? again, something to think about. But he gets 4 catches, 108 yards, and, was definitely a big play threat. Wan'Dale, he gets receptions. He got 5, but only for 30 yards. So Wan'Dale has not really been he has not been as big a part of the offense lately. Theo Johnson, 3 for 35. He made one pretty big catch late. I think for him, like, I see the skills with him, but he hasn't really been involved much. But I think we'll see what Theo Johnson's future holds. Just to finish out the offense, Chris Hubbard started at left tackle over Josh Ezeudu, which is pretty damning on Ezeudu. Now, again, like, Ezeudu's not a good option. He really shouldn't be left tackle. He was drafted as a guard, but Chris Hubbard, who is a veteran, who was picked up, I believe, off of the Niners practice squad, he actually started his career with the Steelers, did not look very good. And you wouldn't expect him to, going up against Alex Highsmith, who had 2 sacks, and then TJ Watt against an injured Jermaine Illuminor. So Illuminor played, but he was definitely banged up. And Watt had a couple of sacks, and like I mentioned, he had that fumble recovery as well. So yeah, offensive line, it actually could have probably been worse, to be honest, considering the matchup. Kind of held their own, but again, no Andrew Thomas is an absolute killer for this team. Trying to think if there were any like other injuries on the offensive side. None that come to mind. Defensively, I had mentioned the injuries in the secondary. Obviously, Cordell Flott, Adoree Jackson, Trey Hawkins. But yeah, Armon Watts was actually in over. So Watts is a guy that I think was picked up recently. He was on the practice squad. Now he's on the active roster. And he was in, they healthy scratched Jordan Riley. I think his time as a Giant is probably coming towards the end sooner than later. He looked pretty bad in a little bit that he was in the Eagle game last week. But this was a game that, the stats don't show up for Dexter Lawrence. No sacks for Dexter Lawrence this week. So I guess he stays at, what is it? Is it 9? Which is, again, like the fact that, like, that's crazy. But, yeah, he was still a bit of a force, but doesn't really come up with much on the stat sheet. Although, look, Najee Harris was good. Like, the Pittsburgh running game, Harris specifically was really good. Like, Russell Wilson has definitely added a dimension to the Steeler offense. Since they went from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson, which I kind of felt at the time. I was skeptical of that, but it gives them a deep play threat, really good on the bootleg action plays where he can roll out and find, specifically George Pickens, really, but Van Jefferson got involved. 2 sacks for Azeez Ojulari. Now with Azeez Ojulari, who's been in for Kayvon Thibodeau, another player to look at, similar to Darius Slayton. Could Ojulari be on the move? Giants should really try to be in sell mode. To me, at 2-6, if you can get mid-round draft picks, you should go for it. So Ojulari, a couple of sacks. Brian Burns gets 1 sack as well. And a half sack by Bobby Okereke and Micah McFadden. So I thought they had their struggles early, but then, they combined to force that fumble by Russell Wilson. So, it got a little bit better as the game went along. But again, Giants have really been getting gashed in the run game for the most part this season. So let's go into some of the play-by-play. And there weren't a whole lot of punts in this game either. Jamie Gillen continues to be out with that hamstring injury. So, like no Graham Gano, no Jamie Gillen. And so it leads to Matt Hack and Greg Joseph as your punter and your kicker. So Steelers get the ball first. And it looked as if they were going to get a touchdown on this drive. They were really moving the ball downfield pretty easily. A lot of Najee Harris and then Jaylen Warren involved as well later on in the drive. And it was a touchdown nullified. George Pickens, 11-yard touchdown, but it was a face mask on the Steelers. I forget the defender who had their helmet pulled, to be honest. It might have been Armon Watts, but I don't remember specifically. So that really was a big game changer in terms of what would have been a touchdown. Now 2nd and 24. The Steelers ultimately settle for a Chris Boswell 31-yard field goal, makes it 3-0. The Giants then they counter back with a field goal of their own. And the big play was a Jones to Slayton 43-yard reception. And then again, sloppiness from the Giants where there's a delay of game on the Giants, which makes it 3rd and 12. And then a Wan'Dale Robinson 7-yard catch leads to a Greg Joseph 29-yard field goal. It's the little things like that you can't have happen. Still in the first quarter, Steelers, another pretty solid drive. for them, which leads and they kind of stall out as well. Najee Harris, a 26-yard run to the Giant 8, but the Giants, again, that Shane Bowen defense, it's a bit bend but don't break in the red zone, and Chris Boswell with a 25-yard field goal makes it 6-3. Giants, again, though, they tied up with a field goal, and what was impressive here was the Giants, John Runyon's called for a holding penalty, but it doesn't really hold them back. They're still able to get the first down, and involvement by different players along the way here. We go into the second quarter, and despite some Giant penalties, and there were some, and there was a Giant fourth down conversion. So 3rd and 12 at the Pittsburgh 38, 10-yard catch Neighbors, 5-yard catch Neighbors. And then on a 2nd and 3 at the Pittsburgh 16, it appeared as if Daniel Jones threw a 16-yard touchdown pass to Chris Manhertz, but they call a legal shift on Malik Neighbors. Probably a bit of a ticky-tack call, but Neighbors probably wasn't fully set. And so that takes the touchdown off the board, ultimately leading to a Greg Joseph 39-yard field goal, makes it 6-6. Then as we move along in the second quarter, the Steelers put up another pretty solid drive that ends in a field goal. Van Jefferson with a 12-yard catch, Najee Harris a 13-yard run, George Pickens a 14-yard catch. But again, they stall out, and this was the drive where it looked like Russell Wilson and George Pickens touchdown, but the call would be reversed, and it was the right call. This is the one where Deonte Banks, again, not really great in terms of his coverage and his ability to knock the ball away, but the right call was made, and so it ends up in a 27-yard field goal for Chris Boswell. I should also mention that there was a couple of other instances where Banks in the run game, like Najee Harris hurtled over him, and Najee Harris is known for that, but there was just a couple of things I noticed where Deonte Banks just, not really all the way in is the only way that I could really best describe it. So it's 9-6 Steelers. Giants go 3 and out. Pittsburgh gets the ball back, and it's a punt of their own as well. And a couple of sacks on this drive, Azeez Ojulari being one of them, and then Brian Burns later on to really, if there was, Pittsburgh was in Giant territory, that takes him completely out of any potential field goal range, obviously, and Pittsburgh punts it away. What ends up happening is Pittsburgh calls their 3rd and final timeout on a 3rd and 8 at the Giants 19. Giants have the ball. So it made sense for Pittsburgh to call the timeout, but it actually ends up working in the Giants' benefit as they take a deep shot to Darius Slayton for 36 yards, then another Slayton catch for 11. Giants moving the ball a little bit, but ultimately it ends up 4th and 2 at the 26. And with 21 seconds left, it made sense. They settle for the 3. And so they make something out of nothing there. Giants have actually been a little bit better this year in terms of at the end of the first half, where for years they couldn't do anything. They have been getting some points and finding ways, I guess, in the 2-minute drill. Even though it doesn't feel like they get that done at the end of the second half, they have gotten better at it. So 44-yard field for Greg Joseph ties it up at 9. And that's the score going into the second half. Giants get the ball first. Tyrone Tracy with a 26-yard run that puts it into Pittsburgh territory. Malik Neighbors with an 8-yard catch to give him a first down. But what happens is a couple of sacks take the Giants out of field goal range, which shouldn't have happened considering they got to the Pittsburgh 31. TJ Watt with a sack, Alex Highsmith as well. And so the Steelers get the ball back, but they go 3 and out. They do. There was a false start in there as well, but Giants. So what happens is the Giants get the ball back, but they go 3 and out. And a delay of game for them as well. And then Daniel Jones was sacked by Alex Highsmith. So this is where Matt Hawk punts it away. 4th and 17 at the Giants 19. It looked, now they called I guess there was a penalty on the Giants, either a legal formation or a false start or a legal shift, something of that nature. And I guess, I don't know, I'm not seeing, on the play-by-play, I'm not seeing it here, so it's possible that flag got picked up. I'm not 100% sure. But what they missed was a Steeler running into or roughing the punter, Matt Hawk. Ultimately, though, Calvin Austin returns it for 73 yards and a touchdown. That was really, out of everything, that's the play that probably sticks out to me the most in this game. That was the one big difference maker play. One that you don't ever see the Giants get. So that makes it 16-9 Pittsburgh. Giants get the ball back, and they unfortunately go 3 and out. And then this is where Pittsburgh's kind of rolling a bit. The Steelers then go on a 9-play, 80-yard drive, which starts in the third quarter, ends in the fourth quarter, and some third down conversions as well. An 11-yard catch by Pat Freiermuth on a 3rd and 7, and then a Van Jefferson 36-yard catch on a 3rd and 11 on the last play of the third quarter. Nick McLeod, he was in the vicinity, probably could have defended a little bit better, and Jefferson along the sidelines makes the catch. And then on a 3rd and 8, so again, like pretty significantly long third downs, Russell Wilson finds Calvin Austin. So the guy who returned a punt for a touchdown gets a receiving touchdown, 29 yards over Drew Phillips to give the Steelers a 23-9 lead. But give the Giants credit, like they, Amir Smith-Marset gets a good kickoff return to put it to about midfield. And this is where a 3rd and 16 conversion from Jones to Neighbors, again, to keep things alive. It's the fourth quarter. And then on 2nd and 10 at the 45, Tyrone Tracy Jr., a 45-yard touchdown run. The kid's impressive. And so that puts him down 8. And the Giants decide to go for 2. And they go with a funky formation to be certain. And they were looking, Jones looked at the defense. What he saw he liked, he snapped it, but the Giants just simply weren't ready. It was a pretty bad look. And, again, apparently Singletary was talking to the official, and yeah, it was an incomplete pass to Malik Neighbors. Like, it was pretty bizarre. Again, I have no problem with the idea of going for it at all. It doesn't work out. It remains an 8-point game. Then the Steelers would get a field goal and they moved it down pretty good. A big George Pickens play for 43 yards to the Giant 10. But the Giants, again, it's a bit of bend but don't break as Ezel Ojulari gets a sack and Chris Boswell hits a 27-yard field goal, makes it 26-15. But the Giants, they do counter back again with a field goal themselves. A Darius Slayton 3rd down conversion, an 18-yard catch for him. Tyrone Tracy, a 17-yard run. But a big incompletion, Jones to Neighbors, which should have been a catch and run for a first down. Neighbors drops it. And so they settle for a Greg Joseph 48-yard field goal, makes it an 8-point game. Now here's where things get interesting. Under 5 minutes left, Russell Wilson on a 2nd and 6 at his own 34. I guess it goes down as a split sack between Okereke and McFadden, and it's a forced fumble by the two of them, recovered by Bobby Okereke. So Russell Wilson, who had been playing pretty mistake-free football, messes up there. Giants get the ball with good field position, down by 8, plenty of time to tie this game. But what happens is on a 3rd and 7, Daniel Jones is sacked by TJ Watt, and Jones fumbles it, and it's recovered by Watt. So the mistake that was made was they said after the game, Jones should have motioned Theo Johnson over to chip and help Jermaine Illuminor. Watt beats Illuminor clean. Jones has no idea he's there. Easy sack, fumble, recovery. And so they give it right back. That's typical Giant stuff where they get the recovery, but then they, again, just give it right back to Pittsburgh. So the Steelers, with a chance to maybe just ice it, they don't quite do that. They do get maybe a couple of first downs. They make the Giants call all 3 timeouts, but they do have to punt it away. The Steelers were looking to end it with a first down. They don't do it. And after the 2-minute warning, Giants get the ball back at their own 7 with no timeouts, down by 8. And give the Giants credit, they do move the ball downfield. A Neighbors catch, Wan'Dale Robinson, and the big play was Theo Johnson, a 25-yard reception to the Giant 47. Then Malik Neighbors with a 15-yard catch to the Pittsburgh 35. Then after an incomplete pass to Neighbors on a 2nd and 10 at the Pittsburgh 35, Daniel Jones, probably with his biggest fuck up of the game. He faces a little bit of pressure, and he ends up kind of chaotically and in panic, throws it in the direction of Devin Singletary. Wasn't a great throw. And with a couple of Steelers defenders there, it's Beanie Bishop getting the interception and sealing the win for the Pittsburgh Steelers, 26-18. It's those little things like that. Look, Daniel Jones' game, I felt it was okay. It really wasn't bad. It was decent. But then at the end of it all, he fucks up certainly enough to the point where you end up feeling just more negative than positive about Daniel Jones. So, another primetime loss to the Giants. It's a 26-18 victory for the Steelers. Giants dropped to 2-6, and now they'll head home to take on the Commanders. And I don't know, I could see the Giants winning this game. Look, my mindset is more, it's beneficial to lose games than win games. So there's that thought process in mind. But Commanders coming off a very emotional win, a Hail Mary that worked against the Chicago Bears. Now, there's a lot of enthusiasm around the Commanders. Now, if you remember, week 2, the Commanders won a very close game against the Giants in Washington. I suspect that this will be, I know it's a short week, I get that, but I don't believe that's going to factor in too much. But I think that this will be a close game. And then the Giants go to Germany to play Carolina, and they have their bye week. So an interesting next couple of weeks. But yeah, this Washington game, I don't know. I had this feeling the Giants might win it, although I know that they're not good in division. But if there's one team they typically have beaten division, of course, more so before the Commanders got Jaden Daniels, it was Washington. So the Giants sit right now at 0-3 in division, and we will see if they are able to prevent themselves from going 0-4 as they take on the Commanders next week. But again, the Giants take the loss on Monday Night Football. They lose in Pittsburgh to the Steelers by a score of 26-18.